The night I stopped running from my bloodline was the night the Alpha King found me kneeling in my grandmother's cabin, my hands buried in the silver fur of his dying beta. I had spent 23 years hiding what I was, and in a single breath of moonlight, everything I had built crumbled like frost beneath the sun. I should begin where the silence started, in the great stone house at the edge of Thornwick Village, where I had served as a maid for nearly 4 winters. The Ashford family kept me because I was quiet, because I never complained, because I scrubbed their floors until my knuckles bled and asked for nothing but a bed in the cellar and enough bread to survive. They did not keep me out of kindness. Mistress Ashford made that clear the first morning I arrived at her door, a trembling girl of 19 with nothing but a leather satchel and a silver medallion hidden beneath my dress. She looked at me the way one looks at a stray dog, calculating whether I was worth the scraps. I made myself worth them. I woke before the sun touched the mountains and worked until the stars appeared above the pine forests. I learned the rhythm of their household, the creak of every floorboard, the way Master Ashford's boots sounded on the stairs when he had been drinking, the particular sigh Mistress Ashford made when she was about to find fault with my work. I became invisible, which was exactly what I needed to be. Invisible girls do not attract questions. Invisible girls do not remind anyone of the witch who once lived in the cabin at the forest's edge, the woman the village still whispered about when the winds howled and the wolves sang in the distance. My grandmother had been dead for 6 years when I came to Thornwick, but her memory lingered like smoke in the walls of her cabin. I found it abandoned, the roof partially collapsed, the herb garden overtaken by wild growth. The villagers avoided that stretch of forest. They said the witch's spirit still walked there, that she had cursed the land before she died, that anyone who entered her territory would be marked by the old magic and never return the same. I let them believe it. Their fear became my protection. Every 7th night, when the household slept and the village fell into darkness, I slipped from my cellar bed and walked the 3 miles through the frozen forest to my grandmother's cabin. I had rebuilt it slowly over the years, replacing rotted boards with timber I gathered myself, patching the roof with pine boughs and clay, restoring the hearth where she had once brewed her medicines. The villagers thought the cabin was haunted. They did not know that the lights they sometimes saw flickering through the trees were my candles, that the strange sounds they heard were my voice singing the old songs my grandmother had taught me before the fever took her mind, and then her body. I was not a witch. That word belonged to the fearful, to those who needed simple explanations for things they could not understand. I was something older, something my grandmother had tried to explain in her final lucid days, when she pressed her silver medallion into my palm and made me swear to protect what she called the Old Covenant. I did not fully understand what she meant then. I was 17, terrified, watching the only family I had ever known slip away into death. I promised her everything she asked, and then I buried her beneath the great oak behind the cabin and spent the next 6 years trying to forget. But forgetting was never truly possible. The forest would not let me forget. It called to me in dreams, in the rustle of wind through the pines, in the howling of wolves on winter nights that seemed to carry words I almost recognized. The medallion grew warm against my skin when I walked beneath the ancient trees, as though it remembered something my mind had tried to bury. And the wolves watched me with eyes that held too much intelligence, too much knowing, as though they were waiting for me to remember who I was supposed to be. I first saw the white wolf 3 winters ago, on a night when the snow fell so thick I could barely see the path before me. I was returning to my cabin with a basket of herbs I had gathered from the frozen meadow, my fingers numb despite my wool mittens, my breath crystallizing in the air before my face. I felt him before I saw him, a presence at the edge of my awareness, ancient and powerful and utterly still. When I turned, he was standing between 2 massive pines, his coat so white it seemed to glow against the darkness, his eyes the color of autumn amber burning with an intelligence that stopped my heart. We stared at each other across the snow-covered clearing, neither of us moving, neither of us breathing. I should have been afraid. The villagers told stories of this wolf, the alpha king of the northern mountains, a beast so large and fierce that hunters who pursued him never returned. They said he was a demon, a spirit of vengeance, a creature born from the forest's hatred of mankind. But standing there in the falling snow, watching those amber eyes study me with something that looked almost like recognition, I felt no fear. I felt seen. I felt known. And that terrified me more than any demon ever could. He did not approach me that night. He simply watched as I gathered my courage and continued on my path to the cabin. When I looked back from the doorway, he was gone, leaving only massive paw prints in the snow as proof that he had ever been there at all. I told myself it was a chance encounter, that wolves often wandered near human settlements in the harsh winters when prey was scarce. I told myself the intelligence I had seen in his eyes was merely my imagination, my grandmother's stories bleeding into reality. I told myself many things that winter, and I believed none of them. He returned again and again over the following months, always at a distance, always watching. Sometimes I would feel his presence while gathering herbs in the forest, a weight of attention that made the medallion hum against my skin. Sometimes I would glimpse a flash of white between the trees while walking back to the village before dawn. He never threatened me. He never came close enough to touch. But he was always there, a silent guardian I had never asked for, watching over me with those knowing amber eyes. The night everything changed began like any other. I had finished my duties at the Ashford house, scrubbing the kitchen until every pot gleamed, banking the fires in the great hall, laying out Mistress Ashford's clothes for the morning. The household slept, their breathing steady behind closed doors, unaware that their invisible maid was about to disappear into the night once more. I wrapped myself in my grandmother's old cloak, the wool still carrying the faint scent of the herbs she had once woven into its fibers, and slipped out the servants' entrance into the frozen darkness. The forest was alive that night in ways I had rarely felt before. The snow had stopped falling, leaving the world blanketed in white that glowed beneath the half-moon. Every branch, every stone, every frozen stream seemed to pulse with an energy I could not name, as though the land itself was holding its breath. The medallion burned against my chest, hotter than I had ever felt it, and somewhere deep in the mountains, a wolf howled with a sound that pierced straight through my bones. I should have turned back. I should have recognized the signs, should have remembered my grandmother's warnings about nights when the old magic stirred and the boundary between worlds grew thin. But something pulled me forward, a compulsion I could not resist, a certainty that I was needed in a way I had never been needed before. I quickened my pace through the snow, my breath coming fast, my heart pounding with an urgency I did not understand. I smelled the blood before I saw it. That copper scent cutting through the clean winter air, wrong and terrible and far too much for any small wound. I began to run, abandoning the path, crashing through underbrush and snow drifts with a desperation that bordered on madness. The medallion was searing now, so hot it should have burned my skin, and the forest seemed to be pushing me forward, branches parting before me, roots flattening beneath my feet, as though the land itself was clearing my way. I found her in the clearing behind my cabin, where my grandmother's grave lay beneath the ancient oak. A wolf, silver-furred and smaller than the white alpha, her body twisted with pain, dark blood pooling beneath her onto the snow. Her eyes found mine as I burst through the trees, and I saw in them something that shattered every wall I had built around my heart. She knew me. She had been waiting for me. And she was dying. I fell to my knees beside her, heedless of the blood soaking into my skirts, my hands already moving to examine her wounds. A trap, I realized, one of the cruel iron contraptions the hunters set along the forest's edge. It had caught her hind leg, tearing through muscle and tendon, and she had dragged herself here, to this sacred place, leaving a trail of red across the white snow. She whimpered when I touched the wound, but she did not snap, did not try to flee. She trusted me with a certainty that made my eyes burn with tears I had not shed in years. I worked without thinking, my grandmother's training rising up from some deep place inside me that I had tried so hard to ignore. I spoke the old words she had taught me, the prayers to the forest spirits, the songs of healing that had been passed down through our bloodline for generations beyond counting. My hands glowed with a soft silver light I had never seen before, and the medallions sang against my chest, a sound like distant bells or wind through winter branches. The wolf's breathing steadied, the bleeding slowed, and somewhere behind me, in the darkness between the trees, I felt him arrive. I did not turn. I could not turn. Not with my hands buried in the silver wolf's fur, not with the healing magic flowing through me for the first time in my life. But I felt him there, the white alpha, his presence vast and ancient and absolutely still. He was watching me as he always watched me, but something had changed. Something had shifted in the space between us, and I knew with a certainty that went beyond reason that after tonight, nothing would ever be the same. The smaller wolf's eyes fluttered closed, her breathing finally even, the worst of her wounds sealed by whatever power had moved through me. I sat back on my heels, exhausted in a way I had never experienced before, as though the healing had drawn from some deep well inside me that had been sealed shut for years. My hands were covered in blood, my grandmother's cloak ruined, and the night air bit at my skin with a cold that seemed to reach into my very bones. Only then did I allow myself to turn and face what waited in the shadows. He was larger than I remembered, larger than any wolf should be, his massive body blocking the path back to the trees. His white coat gleamed in the moonlight, every scar on his muzzle and shoulder visible, a map of battles I could not imagine. But it was his eyes that held me frozen, those amber depths burning with an emotion I could not name. He looked at me the way one looks at something precious that has finally been found, something searched for across years and miles and perhaps even lifetimes. He looked at me like he knew exactly who I was, even though I myself had forgotten. We stayed like that for a long moment, the dying embers of my healing magic still flickering around my fingers, the silver wolf sleeping peacefully beside me, the ancient oak rising above us like a witness to something sacred. I should have been afraid. I was trespassing in his world now, had revealed myself as something more than human, something that existed in the space between the village's reality and the forest's wild magic. But when he finally moved, stepping forward through the snow with a grace that belied his massive size, I did not run. I did not even breathe. He stopped an arm's length away, close enough that I could see the individual hairs of his coat, could smell the wild scent of pine and snow, and something older, something that made my blood hum with recognition. His eyes never left mine as he lowered his great head, and for one terrifying, wonderful moment, I thought he might speak. The old stories said the wolf spirits could take human form, could walk between worlds as easily as crossing a stream. I had always thought those were just stories, tales to frighten children and explain the unexplainable. Now I was not so certain. But he did not speak. Instead, he pressed his muzzle gently against my bloody hands, a gesture so tender and unexpected that a sob caught in my throat. I felt his breath warm against my frozen fingers, felt the soft fur of his face, felt something pass between us that I could not name but could not deny. It was acknowledgement. It was gratitude. It was something that felt terrifyingly like a promise. When he pulled back, his eyes held mine for one more endless moment. Then he turned to the sleeping silver wolf, nudging her gently with his nose, and I understood without words that she was precious to him. Pack, perhaps, or something more. He was trusting me with her, leaving her in my care, and the weight of that trust settled over my shoulders like a mantle I had not chosen, but could not refuse. He vanished into the forest as silently as he had come, leaving me alone with the wounded wolf and the shattered remnants of the life I had built. I sat in the bloody snow until the cold became unbearable, until my tears had frozen on my cheeks and my fingers had gone numb around the silver medallion. Then I gathered the smaller wolf into my arms, surprised by how light she was despite her size, and carried her into my grandmother's cabin. The door closed behind me with a sound like a seal being broken, or perhaps like one being formed. I laid the silver wolf on the bed of furs near the hearth, where my grandmother had once slept, where I had curled as a child and listened to her stories of the old covenant and the guardians who had served it. She did not wake as I built up the fire, did not stir as I heated water and gathered the herbs I would need to continue treating her wounds. Whatever healing magic I had channeled in the clearing had drained from me completely, leaving only my mortal skills, but those would have to be enough. As I worked, cleaning the wolf's leg and applying poultices of yarrow and comfrey, I allowed myself to think about what I had revealed. For 6 years, I had hidden what I was. I had denied my grandmother's teachings, ignored the pull of the old magic, pretended to be nothing more than a poor maid seeking honest work. I had been so afraid of the villagers and their superstitions, afraid of becoming my grandmother in their eyes, afraid of being burned or drowned or driven into the wilderness to die alone. And now, in a single night, all of that careful hiding had been undone. The White Alpha knew. He had seen the light in my hands, had felt the power that moved through me. He had watched me heal his packmate with magic that had not been practiced openly in these forests for a generation. And wolves, even magical wolves, were not known for keeping secrets. What would happen when the hunters learned that a new witch had risen at the forest's edge? What would happen when Mistress Ashford discovered that her invisible maid had been sneaking out to practice forbidden arts? What would happen when the village decided that my grandmother's curse had found a new vessel? I did not have answers. I had only fear and exhaustion, and a small silver wolf whose breathing had finally steadied into peaceful sleep. I had a medallion that still hummed with warmth against my chest. I had a cabin filled with my grandmother's herbs and books and secrets. And I had, somewhere in the dark forest beyond my walls, a wolf king who looked at me like I was something worth protecting. Dawn was approaching when I finally allowed myself to rest. I pulled a chair beside the bed of furs and watched the silver wolf sleep, her chest rising and falling steadily, her wounded leg wrapped in clean bandages. Outside, the first birds were beginning to sing, and the light creeping through my shuttered windows promised a clear day. I would need to return to the Ashford house. I would need to pretend that nothing had changed, that I was still the same invisible maid who had scrubbed their floors yesterday and would scrub them again tomorrow. But even as I planned my lies, I knew they would not hold forever. Something had awakened in me tonight, something that had slumbered since my grandmother's death, something that the forest and the wolves and the old magic itself seemed to recognize even when I did not. I had made a choice in that bloody clearing, had accepted a responsibility I did not fully understand, and there would be no going back. The silver wolf opened her eyes as the sun's first rays touched the cabin walls. She looked at me with an intelligence that confirmed everything I had tried to deny. And when she shifted slightly on the furs, I could have sworn I saw gratitude in her gaze. I reached out and rested my hand on her head, feeling the softness of her fur, the steady beat of her heart beneath my palm. "I do not know what you are," I whispered to her, "or what I am supposed to become, but I could not let you die. I hope that is enough." She made a soft sound, something between a whimper and a sigh, and pressed her head more firmly against my hand. Outside, in the forest that had always been waiting for me, a single wolf howled in the growing light, and though I could not see him, I knew it was the Alpha, keeping watch over his packmate, keeping watch over me. I closed my eyes and listened to that wild song, feeling it resonate in my bones, in my blood, in the medallion that had belonged to my grandmother and her grandmother before her. I was no longer invisible. I was no longer hidden. Whatever came next, I would face it as who I truly was, not who I had pretended to be. But first, I needed to survive the day. And that meant returning to the village before anyone noticed I was gone. The silver wolf caught my hand gently in her teeth as I rose to leave, not biting, just holding, as though she understood and wanted to offer what comfort she could. I knelt beside her one last time, pressing my forehead to hers, breathing in her wild scent. I will come back, I promised. Tonight, when it is safe. I will not abandon you. She released my hand and watched me go with those knowing eyes, and as I stepped out into the cold morning light, I felt the weight of her trust settle beside the weight of the alphas. 2 wolves, 1 wounded and 1 watching. 1 covenant, dormant for a generation. 1 terrified woman, walking the line between 2 worlds. The path to the village had never seemed so long, or so final. As I reached the edge of the forest, where the trees gave way to the snow-covered fields that surrounded Thornwick, I paused to look back. The cabin was invisible from here, hidden by the dense pines and the natural curve of the land. But I knew it was there, waiting. I knew she was there, healing. And somewhere in those ancient woods, I knew he was there too, watching me walk away with those amber eyes that saw far too much. The medallion pulsed once against my chest, warm and certain, as though reminding me of promises I had made and promises yet to come. I turned my back on the forest and walked toward the village, toward my lies and my hidden life and the danger that was surely coming. But even as I moved through the familiar snow-covered streets, even as I slipped through the servants' entrance and into the cold stone house where I had been nothing but a shadow for 4 years, I carried the forest with me. I carried the scent of wolf fur and pine needles, the memory of amber eyes in moonlight, the echo of magic that had finally found its way home. And deep in my heart, in a place I had kept locked since I was 17 years old, I carried something that felt dangerously like hope. The kitchen was empty when I entered, the fires banked to embers, the copper pots gleaming in the dim light. I had perhaps an hour before the household stirred, an hour to wash the blood from my hands and change my ruined clothes and become invisible once more. I moved quickly, mechanically, my body performing the familiar routines while my mind remained in the forest, in the cabin, beside the sleeping wolf. I was scrubbing my hands in the basin of cold water, watching the last traces of red swirl away, when I heard the footsteps on the stairs. Not Master Ashford's heavy tread, not Mistress Ashford's purposeful stride. These steps were different, lighter, more deliberate. I straightened and dried my hands on my apron just as the kitchen door swung open. Thomas Ashford stood in the doorway, the family's only son, a man my own age with kind eyes and a reputation for causing his mother endless frustration with his unconventional ideas. He was dressed for travel, I noticed, his boots already laced, a heavy coat over his arm, and he was looking at me with an expression I had never seen before, something between curiosity and concern and a knowledge that made my stomach clench with sudden fear. "You came from the forest," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I saw you from my window. You came from the direction of the witch's cabin." My heart stopped. My carefully constructed world tilted on its axis, and in the growing light of dawn, with wolf blood still caught beneath my fingernails and magic still humming in my veins, I understood that my time of hiding had finally, irrevocably, come to an end. Thomas Ashford waited for my answer with the patience of a man who had learned that silence often revealed more than questions. I stood frozen beside the basin, my wet hands dripping onto the stone floor, my mind racing through every possible lie I might tell, and finding none that would survive his steady gaze. He had seen me. He knew the direction I had come from. And in this village, where my grandmother's memory still carried the weight of fear and suspicion, That knowledge was more dangerous than any weapon. I was gathering herbs, I finally said, my voice steadier than I expected. For the kitchen stores. Mistress Ashford mentioned that the dried rosemary was running low. He did not believe me. I could see it in the slight narrowing of his eyes, the way his head tilted almost imperceptibly to one side. Thomas had always been different from the rest of his family. More thoughtful, more observant, more willing to question the easy answers that satisfied everyone else. It was why his mother despaired of ever finding him a suitable wife, why his father muttered about sending him to study in the southern cities where such tendencies might be trained out of him. And it was why, of all the people in this household, he was the most dangerous to me. Rosemary does not grow in winter, he said quietly. And even if it did, it would not leave blood beneath your fingernails. I looked down at my hands and felt my careful world crack a little further. The basin water had washed away most of the evidence, but Thomas had always seen more than others. A thin crescent of dark red remained under the nail of my right thumb, damning and undeniable. I had been careless in my exhaustion, careless in my fear, and now I would pay the price. The silence stretched between us, heavy with all the things I could not say. I thought of the silver wolf sleeping in my grandmother's cabin, thought of the white alpha watching from the shadows, thought of the medallion hidden beneath my dress that even now hummed with warmth against my skin. If Thomas reported what he had seen to his parents, if word reached the village elders, everything would unravel. The hunters would come, the cabin would burn, and whatever fragile connection had formed between me and the forest last night would be severed before it could truly begin. I am not going to tell anyone, Thomas said, and his words were so unexpected that I actually took a step backward, nearly stumbling over the edge of the hearth. He moved into the kitchen then, closing the door behind him with a soft click, and when he turned back to me, his expression had shifted into something I could not quite read. I have watched you for a long time, Alara. I know you are not what you pretend to be. My name on his lips startled me almost as much as his words. In 4 years of service, no member of the Ashford family had ever called me by my name. I was the maid, the girl. You there. I was a function, not a person. But Thomas spoke my name like he had been holding it carefully, waiting for the right moment to offer it back to me. I do not understand, I whispered, though I was beginning to, though the pieces were falling into place with a terrible clarity. You have been watching me? He had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable, a flush creeping up his neck that had nothing to do with the cold morning air. Not in any improper way, he said quickly. I simply noticed things. The way you move when you think no one is looking, like you are listening to something the rest of us cannot hear. The herbs you dry on your windowsill that are not found in any kitchen garden. The way the dogs in the village refuse to bark at you, while they howl at every other stranger who passes. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely above a breath. The way my grandmother's silver cross grows warm when you walk past it, the same way it did when the old healer woman came to treat my childhood fevers. My blood turned to ice in my veins. The old healer woman, my grandmother. Thomas remembered her, remembered the warmth of her magic, and now he had connected that memory to me. I was exposed in a way I had never been before, vulnerable to a threat I had not anticipated. If he chose to use this knowledge against me, there would be no escape. But he was not looking at me like a man preparing to strike. He was looking at me like a man who had finally found confirmation of something he had long suspected. And instead of fear, I saw in his eyes something that looked almost like relief. The village believes your grandmother was a witch, he said, and they were glad when she died. But my grandmother told me different stories, ones she made me swear never to repeat. She said the woman in the forest cabin was a guardian, a keeper of old promises, someone who stood between our world and something older and wilder and infinitely more dangerous. She said when the guardian died, the balance would be broken, and the forest would eventually come to claim what was owed. He took a step closer, and I found I could not retreat. The wall was at my back, the basin at my side, and Thomas Ashford was standing before me with secrets I had never imagined he possessed. "The wolves have been coming closer to the village this winter," he continued. "The hunters have seen tracks where no tracks should be, prints larger than any natural wolf could make. And 3 nights ago, I saw something from my window that I have not been able to forget. A white wolf, massive and scarred, standing at the edge of the forest and staring at this house as though he was searching for someone. He held my gaze with an intensity that made my heart race. I think he was searching for you." I could not speak. I could not breathe. Everything I had believed about my invisible life, my careful hiding, my successful deception, was crumbling around me. Thomas had seen the Alpha. Thomas knew about my grandmother's legacy. Thomas was standing in front of me with knowledge that could destroy me, and instead of threat, he was offering something that looked terrifyingly like understanding. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally managed, my voice cracking on the words. "What do you want from me?" He was quiet for a long moment, and I watched emotions flicker across his face like shadows cast by a guttering candle. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with something that sounded almost like grief. "My grandmother is dying," he said. "The physicians say it is simply age, that there is nothing to be done, that we should make her comfortable and wait for the end. But I have seen her at night, when the pain is worst and the medicines do nothing. She calls out for the guardian, for the woman from the forest, for magic that the doctors do not believe in." He swallowed hard, and I saw moisture gathering in his eyes that he quickly blinked away. "I am not asking you to save her. I know that death comes for everyone in its time. But if there is anything at all, that could ease her passage, that could give her peace in her final days, I am asking you to help." The request hit me like a physical blow. He was not asking me to reveal myself, not demanding proof of my abilities, not threatening to expose me if I refused. He was asking for mercy, for compassion, for the kind of healing that had nothing to do with magic, and everything to do with simply being present for someone in pain. And beneath that request, I heard something else, something he was perhaps not even aware of himself. He was asking me to be real, to stop hiding, to acknowledge what we both knew was true. I thought of my grandmother in her final days, the pain that had twisted her features, the way she had reached for me with hands that no longer recognized my face. I thought of the silver wolf sleeping in my cabin, the trust in her eyes when she had let me touch her wounds. I thought of the white Alpha, watching over his packmate, watching over me, trusting me with something precious. And I thought of Thomas, this unexpected ally who had kept his suspicions secret for years, waiting for a moment when they might matter. "Your grandmother was kind to mine," I said slowly, the words feeling strange and dangerous on my tongue. "She was one of the few who did not call her witch, who did not throw stones or spit when she passed. For that kindness, I will do what I can." Thomas's face transformed with relief, and for a moment he looked like the boy he must have been before responsibility and propriety had shaped him into the reserved young man who now stood before me. He reached out as though to take my hand, then stopped himself, remembering the boundaries between us, the chasm of class and expectation that separated the maid from the master's son. "Thank you," he breathed. "I will arrange for you to visit her tonight if possible. I will tell my parents that you are bringing fresh linens, that the upstairs maid is ill and cannot manage the task. They will not question it. They never question anything about the servants." There was bitterness in his voice, a frustration I recognized from my own years of invisibility. Thomas Ashford was trapped in his own way, bound by expectations and traditions he had not chosen, watching the world through a window he was not permitted to open. In another life, under different circumstances, we might have been something like friends. "There is something else," I said. surprising myself with the admission. Something I must tell you, though it may change your willingness to help me hide. He waited, his expression open and patient, and I made a decision that terrified me even as I spoke the words. I have not only been to the forest tonight. I have been healing a wolf there, one of the great ones, the ones the hunters fear. She is injured, caught in a trap, and I have been tending her wounds in my grandmother's cabin. The alpha, the white one you saw, he knows. He followed me there. He watched me heal her. And I think, though I cannot explain why, that this is only the beginning of something I do not yet understand. Thomas absorbed this revelation with remarkable calm, though I saw his hands tighten briefly at his sides. A wolf, he repeated slowly. You are healing one of the forest wolves in the witch's cabin, and the Alpha King has seen you do it. Yes. And you believe this is connected somehow to my grandmother's stories, to the guardianship she spoke of, to the old promises between the village and the forest. I do not know what I believe, I admitted. But the medallion my grandmother left me grows warm when I am near them. The healing came without my calling it, as though it had been waiting inside me for the right moment. And the way the Alpha looked at me, it was as though he recognized something in me that I have not yet recognized in myself. Thomas was quiet for a long time, his gaze distant, his thoughts clearly traveling somewhere I could not follow. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft with wonder rather than fear. My grandmother used to say that the wolves were not simply animals, he said. She said they were the forest's memory, its protectors, its voice in a world that had forgotten how to listen. She said the guardian's role was not to control them or command them, but to translate between their world and ours, to maintain a balance that benefited both sides. He looked at me then, truly looked, as though seeing me for the first time. Perhaps the Alpha followed you because he has been waiting, Alara. Perhaps the forest has been waiting for someone to remember. The words settled into my heart like seeds into fertile soil, and I felt something shift inside me, some wall beginning to crumble that I had built so carefully over years of hiding. I had spent so long denying my grandmother's legacy, running from the responsibility she had tried to pass to me, convincing myself that I could be ordinary if I only tried hard enough. But the forest did not care about my fears. The wolves did not care about my denials. And the magic in my blood did not care about the careful life I had built in this stone house where I scrubbed floors and pretended to be nothing. The morning light was growing stronger now, filtering through the kitchen windows, promising a day I would have to navigate with all my usual care. But something had changed in this conversation. Something had shifted in the space between Thomas and me. And I knew that whatever came next, I would not face it entirely alone. I should go, Thomas said, glancing toward the door with the wariness of someone who knew the household would soon be stirring. I am supposed to ride to the neighboring village today to discuss grain prices with my father's trading partners. But I will return before nightfall, and I will make the arrangements for you to see my grandmother. He hesitated, then added, Be careful today, Alara. The hunters have been restless since the wolves began appearing closer to the village. If anyone suspects your connection to the forest, they will not be as understanding as I am. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and watched him slip out the kitchen door as silently as he had entered. The room felt emptier without him, colder, as though his presence had been a kind of warmth I had not realized I was feeling until it was gone. I stood there for a long moment, my wet hands finally drying in the morning air, my mind churning with everything that had happened and everything that was still to come. The day passed in a blur of familiar duties that had never felt so strange. I swept and scrubbed and carried, performed every task that was expected of me, but my thoughts were elsewhere. They were in the forest with the silver wolf, wondering if she was healing, if she was frightened, if she understood that I had not abandoned her. They were with the white alpha, invisible somewhere in those ancient trees, watching and waiting for something I could not name. and they were with Thomas, riding through the winter countryside, carrying my secrets alongside his own. Mistress Ashford found fault with my work 3 times before midday, her sharp voice cutting through my distraction like a blade through silk. I apologized, corrected my mistakes, tried to focus on the immediate demands of copper pots and linen sheets and floors that never seemed clean enough. But I could feel the medallion against my skin, a constant reminder of who I truly was. And every time I passed a window that looked toward the forest, I had to resist the urge to abandon everything and run. It was late afternoon when I finally found an opportunity to slip away. Mistress Ashford had retired for her daily rest. Master Ashford was closeted in his study with account books, and the other servants were occupied with their own tasks in distant parts of the house. I gathered my grandmother's cloak from its hiding place beneath my cellar bed, wrapped it around myself, and slipped out through the servants' entrance into the cold gray light of the winter afternoon. The walk to the cabin felt different in daylight, more exposed, more dangerous. Anyone might see me taking this path, might wonder why the Ashford's maid was heading toward the forbidden stretch of forest where the witch's spirit was said to roam. I moved quickly, keeping to the shadows of the trees, trying to look like nothing more than a servant on an innocent errand. But my heart was racing, and the medallion was growing warmer with every step, and by the time I reached the cabin's door, my hands were trembling with more than cold. She was awake when I entered. The silver wolf, her amber eyes tracking my movement as I crossed the threshold and closed the door behind me. She had shifted position on the furs, her wounded legs stretched out before her, and I could see that she had been grooming herself, smoothing the fur around the bandages I had applied in the dark hours of the morning. When she saw my face, she made that soft sound again, the one that had sounded like gratitude in the dawn light, and I felt tears prick unexpectedly at my eyes. "I am here," I said, kneeling beside her, reaching out to stroke the silver fur of her head. "I told you I would come back." She pressed into my touch with a trust that humbled me, and I allowed myself a moment to simply exist in her presence, to feel the steadiness of her breathing and the warmth of her body, and the strange, profound connection that had formed between us in a single night of blood and magic. She was beautiful, this wolf, with her coat the color of moonlight on snow and her eyes that held depths I could not fathom. And she was healing, I realized as I carefully unwrapped her bandages to examine the wound. The torn flesh was knitting together at a rate that should have been impossible, the inflammation already fading, the signs of infection I had feared nowhere to be seen. "The magic," I whispered, half to myself. It actually worked. The silver wolf made a sound that might have been agreement, and when I looked up, I found her watching me with an expression that seemed almost amused, as though she had never doubted the magic would work, as though she had known all along what I was capable of, even when I had not known it myself. I spent the next hour tending to her, changing her bandages, preparing a poultice of healing herbs, heating water so I could clean the area around her wound more thoroughly than I had managed in the darkness. She bore my ministrations with patience, only occasionally flinching when I touched somewhere tender, and by the time I finished, I was confident that she would make a full recovery. The leg might never be quite as strong as it had been, might always carry a slight stiffness in the coldest weather, but she would walk again, she would run again. She would return to her pack and her alpha and whatever wild life awaited her in the forest. The thought of her leaving brought an unexpected ache to my chest, and I pushed it away with practiced determination. This was not my world. She was not my companion. I was simply a healer doing what healers did, nothing more. But even as I told myself these things, I knew they were lies. The connection between us was real, forged in blood and magic, and the strange alchemy of a winter night. And somewhere in the forest, watching over us both, was the white alpha who had entrusted me with her care. I was part of something now, whether I wanted to be or not. The light was beginning to fade when I heard the sound that changed everything. Voices in the forest, distant but growing closer, accompanied by the baying of hounds. Hunters. They were hunting in this part of the woods, something they rarely did, something that spoke of desperation or strategy or both. And they were heading directly toward the cabin. The silver wolf heard them too. She raised her head from the furs, her ears pricking forward, her body tensing with an alertness that must have cost her considerable pain. A low growl rumbled in her throat, not threatening but warning, and her eyes found mine with an urgency that needed no translation. We had to move. Now. I did not think. I simply acted, gathering the wolf into my arms despite her size and weight, ignoring the strain in my muscles and the impossibility of what I was attempting. She did not struggle, did not resist, simply tucked her injured leg against her body and allowed me to carry her as I had carried her the night before. The medallion was burning against my skin now, so hot it should have left a mark, and I felt the same strange energy I had felt in the clearing, the forest's power, responding to my need. The back of the cabin had a small door that my grandmother had used for gathering herbs in the garden. I pushed through it now, staggering under the wolf's weight, and plunged into the undergrowth behind the ancient oak. The snow was deep here, untouched, and every step was a struggle. But the voices were growing louder, the hounds more insistent, and I knew that if we were discovered, both the wolf and I would face a fate I could not bear to imagine. I do not know how long I walked, or how far. Time lost meaning in the desperate flight through the winter forest, my breath coming in gasps, my arms screaming with the effort of carrying my precious burden. The silver wolf remained perfectly still, her trust in me absolute, and that trust gave me strength I should not have possessed. The medallion guided me, its warmth pulsing in patterns that led me deeper into the forest, away from the hunters, toward something I could not see but could somehow feel. The clearing appeared without warning, a small open space surrounded by ancient pines, their branches so thick with snow that they formed a natural shelter from the elements. In the center stood a stone, massive and old, carved with symbols I did not recognize but that made the medallion sing against my skin. I lowered the silver wolf onto the snow beside it, my arms finally giving way, my body collapsing beside her in utter exhaustion. We lay there together in the growing darkness, the wolf and I, listening to the sounds of the hunt growing fainter in the distance. They had not found the cabin. They had not found us. We were safe, at least for now, in this strange, sacred place that the forest had revealed. The wolf shifted beside me, her body warm against my side, her head coming to rest on my shoulder as though offering comfort. I turned my face toward her, breathing in her wild scent, feeling the steady beat of her heart, and allowed myself to cry. I do not know what is happening to me, I whispered into her fur. I do not know who I am becoming or what the forest wants from me. I am so afraid. She made a soft sound, something between a whimper and a croon, and pressed closer against me. And in that moment of perfect connection, I heard something I had never heard before. Not words exactly, but meaning, flowing from her mind to mine like water finding its natural course. Not alone. Never alone now. Pack. I sat up so quickly that I nearly tumbled over, staring at the wolf with wide eyes, my heart pounding with shock and wonder. She gazed back at me calmly, as though she had said nothing unusual, as though communicating directly into a human's mind was simply something wolves did when they chose to. You spoke to me, I breathed. In my mind, I heard you. The wolf's eyes seemed to glimmer with something like amusement. Guardian hears, Guardian speaks. Old way, forgotten, but not gone. I was trembling now, though not from cold. Everything my grandmother had told me, everything I had dismissed as folklore and fantasy, was proving true in ways I had never imagined possible. The Guardians could communicate with the wolves. The old covenant was real. And I, whether I wanted to accept it or not, was stepping into a role that had been waiting for me since before I was born. "The hunters," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Why were they so close to the cabin? They never hunt in that part of the forest. The silver wolf's response came tinged with something darker, a shadow of fear that was not her own. "They search. They know Alpha came to Village Edge. They want his pelt, his death." Cold fury rose in my chest, surprising me with its intensity. The white Alpha, that magnificent creature who had watched over me with such patience, who had trusted me with his injured packmate, who had looked at me with eyes that saw more than any humans, was being hunted. And if the hunters caught him, they would kill him without hesitation, without understanding what they were destroying. "Where is he now?" I asked. "Is he safe?" The wolf's response was immediate and certain. "Alpha is always safe. Alpha is strong. But Alpha is worried." She paused, and I felt her attention sharpen. "Alpha waits. Wants to meet the guardian who saved his beta. Wants to know if old promises still hold." My breath caught in my throat. The Alpha wanted to meet me, not just watch from a distance, not just observe from the shadows, but actually come face to face with the woman who had healed his packmate. The thought filled me with equal parts terror and anticipation, and I realized that I was standing at a threshold I had not even known existed until this moment. "When?" I asked. "Tonight. When moon rises. He will come to the sacred stone." I looked at the massive carved rock beside us, its symbols now visible in the last light of day, and understood that I had not stumbled upon this place by accident. The forest had brought me here, to this ancient meeting ground between human and wolf, because it was time. Because I was ready, whether I believed it or not. The evening darkened around us as I sat beside the sacred stone. The silver wolf pressed warm against my side and waited for the Alpha King to emerge from the shadows. The medallion pulsed steadily against my heart, marking time like a second pulse, counting down the moments until my life would change forever. Somewhere in the village below, Thomas Ashford would be returning from his journey, wondering where I was, perhaps worrying that I had been discovered. His grandmother would be slipping deeper into her final sleep, waiting for the comfort only a guardian's touch could bring. And Mistress Ashford would be noting my absence with the cold displeasure that I would have to answer for tomorrow. But all of that belonged to another world, another life, a version of myself that was already fading like mist in morning sunlight. Here, in this sacred clearing, with wolf warmth beside me and ancient magic thrumming through my veins, I was becoming something new, something old, something that had been waiting in my blood since before I was born. The moon rose above the trees, round and silver, casting the clearing in light that seemed almost liquid. The forest fell silent, every bird and beast holding its breath, and from the darkness between the ancient pines, I saw him emerge. The Alpha King, in all his terrible beauty, coming to claim a covenant that had been dormant for a generation. And I rose to meet him, my grandmother's medallion blazing with light against my chest, no longer afraid of what I was about to become. He was more magnificent than memory could hold. The Alpha King, his white coat blazing silver in the moonlight, his amber eyes burning with an intelligence that seemed to pierce through flesh and bone to the very core of my soul. He moved through the snow without sound, without effort, each stride carrying the weight of absolute authority. The forest itself seemed to bow before him, branches parting, shadows retreating, as though even the darkness knew to make way for its king. I stood my ground as he approached, though every instinct screamed at me to run, to hide, to become invisible as I had been for so many years. The medallion was incandescent against my chest, its light spilling through the fabric of my dress like captured starlight. And I felt my grandmother's presence in that glow, her strength flowing into me from wherever she now rested. She had faced this moment once. She had stood before an alpha and spoken the words that bound human and wolf together. Now it was my turn, and I would not shame her memory by showing fear. The silver wolf beside me rose to her feet, her injured leg trembling slightly but holding, and limped forward to meet her alpha. He lowered his great head to touch his muzzle to hers, a gesture so tender and intimate that I felt like an intruder witnessing it. They stood together for a long moment, communicating in whatever silent language passed between packmates, and I saw the tension drain from the alpha's massive shoulders as he confirmed that his beta was healing, was safe, was whole. Then those amber eyes turned to me, and I felt the weight of his attention like a physical force. Guardian. The word resonated in my mind with a depth that shook me to my foundations. His voice was not like the silver wolf's, not soft and fluid, but ancient and powerful, like the sound of mountains settling or rivers carving their paths through stone. You wear the medallion. You carry the blood. But you have been hiding. It was not an accusation exactly, but it was not a question either. He knew. He had known for years, perhaps, watching me from the forest's edge, waiting for me to accept what I was. And I had failed him, failed them all, by choosing fear over duty. I was afraid, I admitted, the words coming out barely above a whisper. My grandmother died before she could finish teaching me. I did not know what I was supposed to do, only that the villagers would kill me if they discovered the truth. So I hid. I tried to be nothing. I thought if I was invisible long enough, the responsibility would pass to someone else. The alpha was silent for a long moment, his gaze never leaving my face. I could not read his expression, could not tell if he was disappointed or angry or simply assessing, but the intensity of his attention made my skin prickle with awareness. Your grandmother understood, he finally said. She knew the fear, the hiding, the weight of expectation. She carried it for 40 years before the illness took her mind. She made mistakes too, decisions born of caution that we did not always agree with, but she never stopped protecting the covenant. She never stopped standing between our world and the hunters who would destroy us. I felt tears gathering in my eyes, grief I had not fully processed surging up from the depths where I had buried it. My grandmother had been so strong for so long, and in the end, she had faced her death alone except for a terrified girl who did not know how to save her. I had failed her then, too. I could not save her, I said, my voice breaking. I tried to use the healing the way she had taught me, but it would not come. I was too young, too untrained. I watched her slip away and I could do nothing. The alpha moved then, closing the distance between us with 3 silent strides until he stood close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his massive body. He was so large that his head was level with my chest, even standing on all fours, and when he pressed his muzzle gently against my hands, the same gesture he had made the night before, I felt something crack open inside me that had been sealed shut for 6 years. She did not want you to save her, he said, and there was something in his mental voice that sounded almost like gentleness. She knew her time had come. She asked us to watch over you, to wait until you were ready, to protect you until you could protect yourself. Everything she did in her final months was to prepare you for this moment, even if you did not know it. I was weeping openly now, tears streaming down my face, falling into the white fur of his muzzle. All those years of guilt, of shame, of believing I had failed the woman who had raised me. And now this ancient creature was telling me that she had planned for this, that she had trusted me to find my way back to the path she had walked, even if it took years, even if I had to stumble through darkness first. I do not know how to be a guardian, I confessed through my tears. I do not know the rituals, the ceremonies, the words that bind the covenant. She died before she could teach me. The alpha pulled back slightly, his amber eyes meeting mine with an expression that seemed almost amused. The rituals are not in words, Guardian. They are in blood and breath and the choices you make when no one is watching. You chose to heal my beta when you could have walked past. You chose to carry her to safety when the hunters came. You chose to stand before me tonight instead of running." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice resonated with something that felt like prophecy. "The covenant is not broken. It has been sleeping. And now, with your choice, it begins to wake." The silver wolf limped forward to stand beside her alpha, her shoulder pressed against his flank in a gesture of solidarity. The two of them facing me, wolf and wolf, pack and power, waiting for me to speak the words that would seal my fate. I do not know exactly what made me do it. Perhaps it was the memory of my grandmother's face in her final moments, the peace that had finally come to her eyes after days of pain. Perhaps it was the trust I saw in the silver wolf's gaze, the trust she had shown me from the very first moment I touched her wounds. Perhaps it was simply that I was tired, so profoundly tired, of being afraid and hidden and alone. "I accept," I said, and my voice did not waver. "I accept the covenant. I accept the responsibility. Whatever my grandmother could not finish teaching me, I will learn. Whatever she left undone, I will complete. I am the guardian of this forest, the keeper of the promises between your kind and mine, and I will not hide any more." The medallion flared with light so bright I had to close my eyes against it. I felt power surge through me, ancient and wild and absolutely terrifying, and for a moment I thought I might shatter from the force of it. But then I felt other presences joining me, supporting me, and I realized that I was not alone. My grandmother was there, a warm whisper of memory. Her mother before her, and her grandmother before that, stretching back through generations beyond counting. The guardians who had come before, their strength flowing into me, their knowledge settling into my bones like seeds into fertile earth. When I opened my eyes, the world had changed. I could see things I had never seen before, trails of light threading through the forest, connections between every living thing, the vast web of life and death and renewal that made up the wild world. The trees were no longer simply trees, but ancient witnesses, their roots reaching deep into memories older than human history. The snow was not simply frozen water, but a blanket of crystallized moonlight, each flake carrying whispers of the clouds that had formed it. And the wolves before me were not simply animals, but spirits of the forest incarnate, guardians in their own right, partners in a dance that had been choreographed millennia before my birth. "You see now," the Alpha said, and there was satisfaction in his ancient voice. "You see as your grandmother saw, as all the guardians have seen? This is the true world, beneath the surface that ordinary humans perceive. This is what we are sworn to protect." I nodded, not trusting my voice, still overwhelmed by the vastness of what I was perceiving. The silver wolf pressed against my side, a warm anchor in the swirling sea of new awareness, and I rested my hand on her head with gratitude that went beyond words. We remained in that sacred clearing for what felt like hours, though it may have been only minutes. The Alpha told me things I had never known, secrets of the covenant that my grandmother had died before she could share. He told me of the ancient war between humans and wolves, the centuries of bloodshed that had nearly destroyed both kinds. He told me of the first guardian, a woman who had walked into the forest with nothing but her courage and had emerged with a treaty that had held for 1,000 years. He told me of the duties I now bore, the responsibilities that came with the power now flowing through my veins. And he told me of the hunters, of the threat they posed not just to the wolves, but to the balance itself. For generations, they had hunted at the forest's edges, taking what they needed but never pressing too deep, respecting the unspoken boundaries that the covenant maintained. But something had changed in recent years. New leaders had risen among them, men who did not believe in the old stories, who saw the wolves as nothing but valuable pelts and the forest as nothing but timber waiting to be claimed. They wanted to push deeper, to take more, to erase the wild world entirely and replace it with the tame order of human civilization. If they succeed, the Alpha said, his mental voice heavy with grief. The balance will shatter. The forest will sicken and die. The rivers will run dry. The game will vanish. And within a generation, the humans themselves will starve. They cannot see this because they do not understand the web that connects all living things. But you see it now, Guardian. You understand what is at stake. I did understand. Looking at the threads of light that connected every tree and stone and creature, I could see how fragile the balance truly was. Pull one thread and others would unravel. Break one connection and the whole web would begin to tear. The hunters thought they were claiming resources, but they were actually destroying the very systems that made those resources possible. What can I do? I asked. I am one woman, newly awakened to powers I barely understand. How can I stand against an army of hunters? The Alpha's eyes gleamed with something that might have been approval. You will not stand alone. You have the pack. You have the forest itself, which will answer your call now that you bear the covenant. And you have allies among your own kind, though you may not yet know who they are. I thought of Thomas, his grandmother's stories, his willingness to keep my secrets. Perhaps I had more allies than I had believed. The night was old by the time I finally left the sacred clearing, the silver wolf walking beside me with a grace that belied her injured leg. The Alpha had vanished into the forest as silently as he had come, but I could feel him out there still, watching over us, beginning the slow work of rebuilding trust between his pack and their new guardian. There was so much to do, so much to learn, so many challenges waiting in the days ahead. But for the first time in 6 years, I did not face them alone. I returned to the village as dawn was breaking, slipping through the servants' entrance of the Ashford house with the last shadows of night. I was exhausted in a way that went beyond physical fatigue, my mind still reeling from everything I had seen and heard and accepted. But there was no time to rest. The household would be stirring soon, and I had duties to perform, a disguise to maintain until I could find a better way. Thomas was waiting for me in the kitchen, his face pale with worry, his eyes searching mine as I entered. I was about to speak, to offer some explanation for my absence, when he shook his head sharply and glanced toward the ceiling. My grandmother, he whispered. She took a turn in the night. The physician says she may not last the day. Please, Alara, if there is anything you can do. I looked at him, this man who had kept my secrets and asked for so little in return, and I made a decision that would reveal me to another human for the first time since my grandmother's death. Take me to her, I said. We climbed the stairs together, past the rooms where the family still slept, to the small chamber at the end of the hall where Thomas's grandmother lay. She was tiny in the great bed, shrunken by age and illness, her white hair spread across the pillow like a halo of snow. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow and irregular. And even without my new sight, I could see that death was very close. But with my new sight, I saw something more. I saw her spirit, bright and brave, and so very tired, clinging to her body by the thinnest of threads. I saw the pain that racked her, the fear she tried to hide, the desperate wish for peace that she could not express. And I saw the love she held for her grandson, a golden thread connecting them that would not break even when she passed into whatever waited beyond. I knelt beside the bed and took her withered hand in mine. The medallion hummed against my skin, and I felt the healing power rising within me, different from how it had been with the wolf, but recognizable nonetheless. This was not about curing the incurable or turning back the tide of time. This was about easing the passage, smoothing the path, helping a tired soul find its way home. I leaned close to her ear and began to sing softly, the old songs my grandmother had taught me, the songs of ending and beginning, of closing one door and opening another. I let the power flow through my hands, not to heal, but to comfort, to dissolve the fear and pain that clung to her like shadows, to fill her last moments with warmth instead of terror. Her eyes opened, clouded with age but suddenly clear with recognition. She looked at me, truly looked, and I saw understanding dawn in her face. "You came," she whispered, her voice so faint I could barely hear it. "The guardian came. I knew you would. I am here," I assured her, squeezing her hand gently. "You can rest now. There is nothing to fear." She smiled then, a smile of such profound peace that it transformed her aged face into something almost young. Her eyes moved to Thomas, standing at the foot of the bed with tears streaming down his cheeks, and the love in her gaze was bright enough to light 1,000 rooms. "My boy," she breathed, "be brave. Remember the stories. The forest remembers too." Thomas nodded, unable to speak, and his grandmother turned her face toward the window where the morning light was now streaming in. I continued to sing, continued to pour comfort and peace into her failing body, and I felt the exact moment when she let go. It was not a struggle, not a fight. It was a release, like a held breath finally allowed to exhale, like a bird taking flight after a lifetime in a cage. She was gone between one heartbeat and the next, and the room fell silent except for the sound of Thomas's quiet weeping. I sat with him for a long time, holding his grandmother's cooling hand, letting him grieve in the presence of someone who understood. The household began to stir around us, servants calling to each other, footsteps on the stairs. But Thomas did not move, and I did not leave him. Whatever came next, whatever consequences I would face for being found in this room, I would not abandon him in his moment of loss. The door opened eventually, and Mistress Ashford stood on the threshold, her face registering shock and then fury at the sight of me kneeling beside her dead mother-in-law's bed. But before she could speak, before she could unleash whatever accusations were forming on her tongue, Thomas rose and faced her with a dignity I had never seen in him before. "Mother," he said, his voice steady despite his tears, "Grandmother is gone." She passed peacefully, with the comfort she needed at the end. "And before you say anything about the maid, you should know that I asked her to come. I asked her because she has skills that no physician possesses, skills that grandmother herself recognized and requested." Mistress Ashford's mouth opened and closed, but no words emerged. She looked from her son to me to the peaceful body on the bed, and something shifted in her expression. Not kindness exactly, but something like reluctant respect. The old woman always had her strange ideas, she finally said, her voice stiff with the effort of controlling her emotions. If she wanted the kitchen girl at her deathbed, that was her choice. But you, Thomas, should know better than to associate with servants in such ways. People will talk. "Let them talk," Thomas said, and there was steel in his words that his mother clearly had not expected. "Grandmother is dead, and the only person in this house who could comfort her was someone you have treated as less than human for 4 years. Perhaps the problem is not with the maid, Mother. Perhaps the problem is with how we have forgotten to see the humanity in those who serve us." He walked past his mother without another word, pausing at the door to look back at me with an expression that was part gratitude and part apology. "I will handle the household," he said. "Take what time you need." And then, so quietly that only I could hear, "Meet me in the stable at midday. We need to talk about what happens next." He was gone before I could respond, leaving me alone with Mistress Ashford and the body of a woman who had believed in me before I had believed in myself. The lady of the house stared at me for a long moment, her eyes narrowed with a suspicion that had not been there before. "You are more than you seem," she said, and it was not a question. I always knew there was something strange about you, something that did not fit. The way the animals calm in your presence, the herbs on your windowsill that should not grow in winter. I thought you were merely odd, perhaps a bit touched in the head. But now I wonder." She did not finish the thought, did not speak the word that hovered unspoken between us. But I could see it in her eyes, the calculation, the weighing of risks and benefits. She was not afraid of me. Not exactly. But she was suddenly, sharply aware that I might be dangerous in ways she had not previously considered. "Tend to her body," Mistress Ashford commanded, her voice regaining its usual authority. "Prepare her for the viewing, and then stay out of sight until the funeral is over. Whatever connection you had to my husband's mother, I do not want the village gossiping about strange maids at her deathbed." I bowed my head in acceptance, hiding my relief beneath the familiar mask of servitude. I had expected worse, much worse. Perhaps the presence of death had softened even Mistress Ashford's hard heart, or perhaps she simply did not want scandal attached to her mother-in-law's passing. Either way, I had been given a reprieve, and I intended to use it wisely. The hours that followed blurred together in a haze of duty and exhaustion. I washed the old woman's body with gentle hands, dressed her in her finest gown, arranged her white hair in the style she had favored in life. I performed these tasks with the reverence they deserved, honoring the woman who had believed in the guardians when so many others had forgotten, who had told her grandson stories that had kept the old knowledge alive for another generation. By the time I finished, the house was full of mourners, relatives, and neighbors come to pay their respects. I slipped away through the servants' passages, invisible once more, and made my way to the stable where Thomas had asked me to meet him. He was waiting beside his horse, a dark bay mare with intelligent eyes, already saddled and ready for travel. When he saw me, he gestured for me to join him in the shadows of an empty stall, where we could speak without being overheard. "The hunters are gathering," he said without preamble, his voice low and urgent. "I heard them talking at the inn last night, after I returned from my journey. They are planning a great hunt, a final push into the deep forest to destroy the wolf pack once and for all. They say the Alpha has been seen too close to the village, that he is a threat that must be eliminated. They do not understand what they are dealing with." My blood ran cold at his words. The Alpha, the magnificent creature who had accepted me as guardian just hours ago, was now the target of a hunt that could change everything. "When?" I demanded. 3 days, Thomas replied. "They are waiting for reinforcements from the neighboring villages, men who specialize in tracking large predators. Once they are assembled, they will enter the forest from multiple directions, driving the wolves toward a bottleneck where the killing will be easy." He paused, his face grim. "They have done this before, in other regions. It is how they exterminated the wolves in the eastern valleys. They call it a cleansing." I felt the word like a blow to the stomach. Cleansing. Such a clean, simple term for the slaughter of an entire pack, for the destruction of a balance that had been maintained for 1,000 years. "I have to warn him," I said, already turning toward the stable door. "I have to tell the Alpha what is coming." Thomas caught my arm, his grip gentle but firm. "Wait, there is more." He hesitated, as though the next words cost him something to speak. "My father is one of the hunt's organizers. He believes the wolves have been taking livestock, threatening travelers, growing bolder because no one has been willing to push back. He does not know what you know, what I know. He thinks he is protecting the village." The complexity of the situation crashed over me like a wave. Thomas's father, my employer, was leading the hunt that would destroy the very beings I had sworn to protect. Thomas himself was caught between family loyalty and the knowledge his grandmother had given him. And I was a maid, a nobody, a woman with newly awakened powers and no idea how to use them against such overwhelming odds. "What do you expect me to do?" I asked, and I heard the desperation in my own voice. "I am one person. The hunters will be dozens, maybe more. Even with the pack, even with whatever power the Covenant gives me. How can I stop this?" Thomas released my arm and stepped back, his expression troubled but determined. "I do not know," he admitted. "But I know that my grandmother believed the guardians could stand between worlds, could speak to both humans and wolves in ways that neither could speak to each other. Perhaps the answer is not to stop the hunt with force, but to change the hearts of those who are hunting." It was a hopeful thought, perhaps naive, but it planted a seed in my mind that would grow over the days to come. Change their hearts, show them the truth, make them see what they were really destroying. Go to the forest, Thomas continued. Warn the pack. Do whatever you need to do. I will delay things here as long as I can. Find reasons to slow the preparations, raise objections that will buy you time. But Alara, he met my eyes with an intensity that made my breath catch. Whatever you are going to do, you need to do it before those reinforcements arrive. After that, there will be no stopping what comes. I nodded, committing his words to memory, feeling the weight of responsibility settle more heavily on my shoulders with each passing moment. Thank you, I said, for everything. Your grandmother would be proud of you. He smiled, a sad smile that did not reach his eyes. Go, save your wolves if you can, and when this is over, one way or another, I hope you will tell me what happens. I hope I will be worthy of the trust you have placed in me. I left him there in the stable, standing beside his horse in the shadows, a man caught between duty and conscience. The afternoon sun was bright as I slipped out the back gate and made my way toward the forest, but its warmth could not touch the cold determination crystallizing in my heart. 3 days. I had 3 days to save the pack, to protect the covenant, to prove that I was worthy of the trust that had been placed in me by wolves and humans alike. The trees closed around me like old friends as I entered the forest, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the sunlight into shifting patterns of gold and green. Somewhere ahead, the Alpha was waiting, unaware of the danger approaching from the human world. Somewhere behind, Thomas was preparing to betray his own father for the sake of truths he had learned at his grandmother's knee. And somewhere in between, I was walking a path that my grandmother had walked before me, a path that led either to salvation or destruction. The medallion pulsed against my chest, warm and steady, and I quickened my pace toward whatever waited in the heart of the forest. There was no more time for fear. There was only time for action. And actions, as my grandmother had always said, were the truest measure of who we really were. The Alpha received the news of the coming hunt with a stillness that frightened me more than any rage could have. He stood at the center of his pack, surrounded by wolves of every size and shade, their eyes all turned toward me as I delivered Thomas's warning. The silver wolf pressed against my side, her presence a comfort I had not known I needed, and I felt the weight of every gaze like stones settling on my chest. 3 days, the Alpha repeated, his mental voice flat and measured. They come in 3 days to cleanse us from the forest. Yes. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to meet those amber eyes that saw so much more than I could ever hide. They are bringing hunters from other villages, men who have done this before. They will drive the pack toward a narrow valley and trap you there. I paused, the next words bitter on my tongue. Thomas's father is leading them. He believes you have been taking livestock, threatening the village. He thinks he is protecting his people. A low growl rippled through the assembled wolves, a sound of anger and fear and ancient grievance. I felt their emotions wash over me through the connection the covenant had opened, felt their memories of other hunts, other losses, generations of conflict with humans who did not understand and did not want to understand. They had every right to hate us, I realized. Every right to see all humans as enemies. And yet here I stood among them, accepted if not fully trusted, asking them to believe that not all of my kind wanted them dead. The Alpha silenced the growl with a single glance, reasserting his authority with the ease of long practice. When he turned back to me, his expression had shifted into something more calculating, more dangerous. Your grandmother faced a hunt once, he said, 30 winters ago, when the previous guardian was newly come into her power. The hunters of that time were fewer, their weapons cruder, but their intent was the same. She found a way to turn them back. She stood in their path and showed them truths they could not deny. What truths? I asked, desperate for any knowledge that might help. What did she do? She revealed herself, the alpha replied. She walked into their camp the night before the hunt and used the Covenant's power to open their eyes. She showed them the web of life that connects all things, the consequences that would follow if they destroyed the pack. Most of the hunters fled in terror. The few who remained became allies, men who understood what was at stake and chose to protect rather than destroy. Hope flickered in my chest, fragile but real. If my grandmother had done it once, perhaps I could do it again. Perhaps there was a way to end this without bloodshed, to change hearts as Thomas had suggested. But the alpha's next words extinguished that hope like water on a candle flame. Your grandmother had decades of training when she faced that hunt, he continued. She knew the Covenant's power intimately, had practiced its use since she was a child at her mother's knee. You have had one night, one glimpse of the true world. To attempt what she did would require strength you have not yet developed. The effort could kill you. Then what do you suggest? I demanded, frustration sharpening my voice. Should we simply wait for them to come? Should I stand aside and watch them slaughter your pack because I am not strong enough to stop them? The silver wolf pressed harder against my side, a wordless reminder to stay calm, to think clearly. I took a breath, forcing my racing heart to slow, and waited for the alpha's response. He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant, consulting memories or instincts I could not access. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of decision that silenced every wolf in the clearing. There is another way, he said. Harder, perhaps, and less certain. But it does not require you to spend your life on a single gamble. He paused, his amber eyes finding mine with an intensity that made my skin prickle. You must speak to them as a human, not as a guardian. You must find the ones among them whose hearts are not yet hardened, whose fears come from ignorance rather than hatred. You must change them one by one, building allies until the tide of opinion shifts. But I have only 3 days, I protested. How can I change enough hearts in 3 days? You cannot, the alpha admitted, but you can change enough to create doubt. You can plant seeds that will grow even after the hunt begins. And when the moment comes, when the hunters stand at the edge of the valley with their weapons raised, you can stand before them and let them choose. Some will choose death, some will choose life. And the ones who choose life will remember. They will speak to others. And in time, the balance will shift. It was not a perfect plan. It was not even a good plan, really. Just a desperate gamble wrapped in the clothes of strategy. But it was something. It was action instead of despair. And as I looked around at the wolves who had placed their trust in a guardian they barely knew, I understood that it was the only chance we had. Tell me who to speak to, I said. Tell me who among the hunters might listen. The alpha shared what he knew. Knowledge gathered from years of watching the human village from the forest's edge. He told me of men who had shown kindness to animals, who had left offerings at the forest's boundary during hard winters, who had spoken against excessive hunting in village councils. Not many, perhaps a handful, but enough to begin. He told me of women too, wives and mothers whose influence might sway their husbands and sons, healers like myself who understood the value of the wild herbs that only grew where the forest was healthy. And he told me of the ones who could not be reached, the hard men whose hatred ran too deep for words to touch. The leader among them was a hunter named Garrett, a man whose brother had been killed by wolves years ago, and who had dedicated his life to vengeance since. He was the one driving this hunt, the voice that whispered poison into the ears of others, the flame that ignited fear into rage. He could not be swayed, the alpha warned me. He could only be stopped or survived. I left the pack as the sun began to set, my mind churning with plans and contingencies and the growing awareness of how little time I had. The silver wolf walked with me to the forest's edge, her injured legs stronger now, though still not fully healed, and when we reached the place where the trees gave way to fields, she stopped and turned to face me. "Be careful," she said, her mental voice soft with concern. The human world is dangerous for those who show what they truly are. Do not reveal yourself until you must. I will be careful, I promised, kneeling to press my forehead against hers one last time. Watch over the pack. Keep them safe until I return. She made that soft sound I had come to recognize as affection, and then she was gone, vanishing into the shadows of the forest as silently as her alpha. I watched her go, feeling the bond between us stretch, but not break. And then I turned toward the village with determination hardening in my heart. The first person I sought was a woman named Martha, a midwife who lived at the village's edge and who had been a friend to my grandmother before the suspicion grew too thick. She was old now, her hair silver and her hands gnarled with years of work, but her eyes were still sharp and her mind still clear. She opened her door to my knock with surprise, recognizing me as the Ashfords' maid, but clearly uncertain why I would be calling on her. I told her the truth. Not all of it, not the parts about magic and covenants and wolves who could speak into human minds. But I told her about the hunt, about the destruction it would bring, about the herbs and medicines that grew only in the deep forest where the wolves maintained the balance. I told her about my grandmother, about the knowledge she had passed to me, about the healing skills that came from understanding the connection between all living things. Martha listened without interruption, her weathered face unreadable. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching mine as though looking for something she needed to find. "Your grandmother was not a witch," she finally said, her voice rough with memories. "I knew her better than most, and I know she was simply a woman who understood things the rest of us were too blind to see. But the village did not want understanding. They wanted someone to blame for their misfortunes, someone to fear, someone to hate. When she died, I thought that fear might die with her. But fear does not die so easily." She rose from her chair with the slowness of age and crossed to a small cabinet in the corner of her cottage. When she returned, she was holding a bundle wrapped in faded cloth, which she placed in my hands with a solemnity that made my breath catch. "She gave this to me," Martha said, "years ago when the sickness came and I helped her treat those who had fallen ill. She said I would know when it was needed, when someone would come who should have it." I unwrapped the bundle with trembling hands and found a book, old and leather-bound. Its pages filled with my grandmother's careful handwriting, recipes for medicines, maps of the forest, descriptions of plants and their uses, and among them, passages I could not read, written in a script that seemed to shift and change when I looked at it too closely. "She was writing this until the end," Martha continued. "Even when her mind was going, she would work on it for hours, filling page after page with things I could not understand. I think she knew you would need it someday. I think she was trying to leave you everything she could not say aloud." Tears blurred my vision as I clutched the book to my chest. My grandmother, even in her final decline, had been thinking of me, preparing for this moment, trusting that I would eventually find my way back to the path she had walked. I had thought her death had left me alone and untrained, but she had been teaching me all along, leaving breadcrumbs for me to follow when I was ready. "Thank you," I whispered to Martha, unable to find words for everything I was feeling. "I will use this well, I promise." Martha nodded, her expression softening into something that looked almost like hope. "I will speak to the other midwives," she said, "and to the herb gatherers, the healers, the women who remember what the forest gives us. I cannot promise they will listen, but I can promise they will hear. It may not be enough to stop the hunt, but it may be enough to make some men hesitate." It was more than I had dared to hope for. I left Martha's cottage with my grandmother's book hidden beneath my cloak and a small flame of possibility kindling in my chest. The next 2 days passed in a blur of conversations, each one delicate and dangerous, each one a gamble that could expose me or win me an ally. I spoke to farmers who had noticed their crops thriving in the fields nearest the forest, to trappers who had observed how the rabbit population remained stable only where the wolves hunted, to the village healer who had long suspected that her best medicines depended on the wild places remaining wild. I did not speak of magic or covenants. I spoke of balance, of consequences, of the simple observation that removing one piece from a complex system often caused the whole thing to collapse. Some listened. Most did not. But even among those who dismissed my words, I saw seeds of doubt take root, questions forming behind their eyes that they could not quite suppress. And with each conversation, I grew more skilled at finding the arguments that resonated, the fears I could address, the hopes I could kindle. Thomas helped when he could, using his position to arrange accidental meetings, to delay preparations, to raise objections in the councils where the hunt was being planned. His father grew suspicious of his interference, but Thomas deflected with skill I had not known he possessed, claiming concerns about the cost of the expedition, about the risk to valuable hunters, about the timing so close to his grandmother's funeral. He bought me hours, sometimes whole days, and I used every moment. But even as I worked, I could feel the clock running down. The reinforcements arrived on the second day, hard men from the eastern valleys with cold eyes and well-oiled weapons. Garrett welcomed them with a feast in the village square, his voice carrying across the cold night air as he spoke of victory, of safety, of finally freeing the village from the threat of the wolves. I watched from the shadows, hidden in my servant's cloak, and I saw how many faces nodded along with his words. The doubters I had reached were a small island in a sea of certainty. That night, I returned to the forest one last time before the hunt. The Alpha met me at the sacred stone. The whole pack gathered around him, and I told them what I had accomplished and what I had failed to accomplish. I told them that some minds had been changed but not enough, that the hunt would proceed in the morning, that we needed a new plan. The Alpha listened with that terrible stillness I had come to recognize as deep thought, his amber eyes reflecting the moonlight like twin flames. When I finished, he did not speak for a long time, and the silence was heavy with the weight of decisions that would determine whether his pack lived or died. "You have done well," he finally said, and there was something in his voice that sounded almost like pride. "Better than I expected, better than most new guardians could have managed. The seeds you have planted will grow in time. But time is the one thing we do not have." He rose to his feet, his massive body unfolding with a grace that belied his size, and walked to stand before me. The other wolves parted around him, creating a circle with the two of us at its center, and I felt the significance of the moment like electricity in the air. "There is one more thing you can do," he said. "One more truth you can show them that no words could convey. But it will require you to trust me completely, to surrender control in a way that will terrify you. And it will reveal you to the entire village as what you truly are." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart pounding with a fear I could not name. "The covenant allows for a joining," he explained. "A temporary merging of guardian and alpha, human and wolf, that creates something neither could be alone. In this state, you would be able to project truth directly into human minds, to show them the web of life as you now see it, to make them feel what the forest feels. It would not change everyone. Some hearts are too hard, some minds too closed. But for those who are capable of change, it would be undeniable." I stared at him, trying to comprehend what he was suggesting. A merging. A surrender of self. The idea was terrifying in ways I could not articulate. A violation of every boundary I had built around myself since my grandmother's death. "What happens to me?" I whispered. "During this joining? What do I become?" "You become us," the Alpha said simply. "And we become you. For a brief time, there is no separation. Your memories, your emotions, your very essence mingles with mine and with the pack's. And through that connection, you gain access to power that neither of us could wield alone. And afterward?" I pressed. "Do I come back? Do I remain myself?" "You come back, You remain yourself. But you will never be entirely the same. The joining leaves traces, memories that are not your own, perspectives you could never have gained otherwise. Some guardians have found it overwhelming. Some have found it transforming. None have regretted it, though all have been changed by it. I thought of everything I had experienced in the past few days, the revelations and transformations that had already altered who I was. I thought of my grandmother, who must have undergone this same joining, who had carried wolf memories alongside her own. I thought of the pack, these beautiful, ancient creatures who were trusting me with their very essence, even as I would be trusting them with mine. And I thought of the hunters, gathering in the village below, preparing to destroy everything the forest held dear. I will do it, I said, and my voice did not waver. Tell me what I need to do. The Alpha's eyes gleamed with something that might have been approval or might have been anticipation. He stepped closer, so close I could feel his breath on my face, could see every silver scar on his muzzle, could count the individual hairs of his magnificent coat. Close your eyes, he instructed, and when I touch you, do not resist. Let go of everything you think you are, everything you think you know. Let the boundaries dissolve. Trust the covenant to guide you through. I closed my eyes. I felt his massive head press against my chest, felt the warmth of his body against mine, felt the medallion flare with light so bright I could see it through my closed lids. And then, like stepping off a cliff into an endless sky, I let go. The sensation was indescribable. It was like drowning and flying and burning and freezing all at once. It was like being unmade and remade in the same breath. I felt my consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of my skull, flowing outward like water, mingling with something vast and ancient and utterly other. I felt the Alpha's mind touch mine, not invading, but joining. Two rivers meeting to form a single stream. And behind him, through him, I felt the pack, dozens of minds and memories and perspectives all flowing into that same great river, all becoming part of something larger than any individual could be. I was Alara, the guardian. I was the Alpha, the king. I was the silver wolf, the beta, carrying memories of the trap that had injured her and the healing hands that had saved her. I was an old wolf who remembered the hunt 30 years ago, the fear and the flight and the guardian who had stood between the pack and death. I was a pup born in the spring, who knew nothing of humans but the stories his elders told, who trembled with fear at the thought of the coming hunt. I was all of them, and they were all me. The world looked different through our shared eyes. The forest was alive in ways I had only glimpsed before, every tree and stone and creature pulsing with the energy of the covenant. The web of life was visible now, not as abstract lines of light, but as living connections, relationships and dependencies that stretched across miles and decades. I could see how the wolves fit into that web, how their hunting kept the deer population healthy, how their presence discouraged smaller predators from overwhelming the ecosystem, how their very existence maintained a balance that benefited every living thing in the forest, including the humans who did not understand. And I could see the damage the hunters would do if they succeeded. I could see the strands of the web snapping, the cascade of consequences that would follow, the slow death of the forest that would eventually reach even the village that had caused it. It was not immediate, not dramatic. It was gradual, insidious, a poison that would spread so slowly that no one would notice until it was too late. This is what you must show them, the Alpha's voice said. But it was not external anymore. It was part of the great flow of consciousness we shared. This is the truth that no words can convey. Let them see. Let them feel. Let them understand. I understood now why this was called a joining. We were not separate beings working together. We were a single entity, a guardian pack, human and wolf united in purpose and perception. And in that unity, I found a power I had never imagined, a strength that came not from dominance but from connection, not from force but from truth. Dawn was approaching. The hunt would begin soon. And we, the joined, the united, the one who was many, rose to meet it. We moved through the forest as a single flowing entity, the pack running in perfect formation around the consciousness that guided them, the guardian's human body carried along by the alpha's strength. We were fast, impossibly fast, covering ground that should have taken hours in mere minutes. The forest parted before us, recognized us, welcomed us as what we truly were, the living embodiment of the covenant that protected it. We reached the village's edge just as the first hunters emerged from their homes, weapons in hand, faces set with determination. They saw us there, at the boundary between forest and field, a massive white wolf with a woman standing beside him, surrounded by the pack, all of us outlined against the rising sun. They stopped. They stared. And through the joined consciousness, I reached out toward them, offering the truth we had come to share. Some minds slammed shut like doors against a storm, too fearful or too hateful to accept what I offered. But others, the ones I had spoken to, the ones whose doubts had taken root, opened like flowers turning toward the light. I poured into them everything we saw, everything we knew, the web of life and the consequences of its destruction. I showed them what the forest had given them, and what they would lose. I showed them the wolves not as monsters but as fellow guardians, partners in a balance that benefited all. Martha was among them, her old eyes wide with wonder as the truth flooded through her. Thomas was there too, his face wet with tears as he finally understood what his grandmother's stories had tried to teach him. The midwives, the healers, the farmers who had noticed their crops thriving, all of them seeing clearly for the first time what had always been true. But Garrett was there too, and where the others opened, he charged forward with a roar of rage, his spear raised, his eyes wild with the hatred that had consumed his life. He ran toward us, toward me, and I felt the joined consciousness waver as the pack's instincts screamed to defend, to attack, to meet violence with violence. No, I commanded, and my will flowed through the bond, holding them back. This is not how we win. The Alpha's strength supported mine, his ancient wisdom guiding me as I faced the charging hunter alone. I did not run. I did not fight. I simply stood, letting the truth radiate from me like light from a flame, offering it to him even though I knew he would refuse. He was almost upon me when Thomas intercepted him, tackling his father's oldest friend to the ground, pinning him with a strength born of desperation. "Stop!" Thomas shouted, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent field. "Father, everyone, stop and look. Really look at what stands before you." The hunters hesitated, their momentum broken, their certainty shaken, and in that moment of hesitation, the choice hung in the balance. The morning sun broke fully over the horizon, bathing us all in golden light. The pack stood motionless, beautiful and terrible, their eyes reflecting the truth I had shared. And I stood among them, the guardian revealed, waiting to see whether the village would choose destruction or salvation. Garrett struggled beneath Thomas's grip, still screaming for blood, but his voice sounded small now, hollow, a single note of hatred against a chorus of uncertainty. The other hunters looked at each other, looked at the wolves, looked at me, and one by one, they began to lower their weapons. I felt the joined consciousness pulse with something that felt like hope, but the hunt was not over yet. And as I would soon learn, Garrett was not the only danger we faced. Behind the gathered villagers, hidden in the shadows of the early morning, other figures were moving. The reinforcements from the eastern valleys, men who had not witnessed the truth, who had not felt the web of life pulse through their minds. Men who had come for one purpose only, and who would not be turned aside by a moment of village doubt. Their leader stepped into the light, a crossbow in his hands and a smile on his face that made my blood run cold. "Pretty trick, little witch," he called out, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "But we have seen such tricks before. They did not save the wolves of the eastern valleys. They will not save these." He raised his crossbow. He aimed at the Alpha. And before I could move, before I could speak, before the joined consciousness could react, he fired. The bolt flew true, straight toward the heart of the wolf who had trusted me, who had joined with me, who had become part of everything I was. And the world slowed to a single crystalline moment of absolute terror. I did not think. I did not plan. I simply moved, throwing myself between the bolt and the Alpha with a speed that should have been impossible, a speed born of the joining that still flowed through my veins. The world was crystal and silence, every detail sharp as broken glass. And I felt the moment stretch into something that seemed to last forever. The bolt struck my shoulder instead of the Alpha's heart. I felt the impact before the pain, a force that spun me sideways and sent me crashing to the frozen ground. Then the pain came, white-hot and blinding, and I heard myself scream as the joined consciousness shattered around me, the connection with the pack severed by the shock of my wound. The Alpha's roar split the morning air, a sound of rage and anguish that made even the hardened eastern hunters take a step backward. The pack surged forward, held back only by the last threads of my will flowing through the broken bond, desperate to attack the man who had harmed their guardian. But I could feel their restraint fraying, could feel the ancient instincts rising up to overwhelm the Covenant's gentler nature. "No," I gasped, clutching my wounded shoulder, blood streaming between my fingers and staining the snow crimson beneath me. "This is not how we win. This is not who we are." The Alpha was beside me in an instant, his massive body positioning itself between me and the hunters, his amber eyes burning with a fury I had never seen in him before. Through the fragments of our bond that still remained, I felt his anguish, his guilt, his terrible rage at the man who had struck down the guardian he had sworn to protect. He wanted blood. Every instinct in his ancient soul demanded vengeance. But he held. For me, for the Covenant, for everything we had tried to build, he held. The Eastern hunter leader laughed, a cold and cruel sound that echoed across the frozen field. He was reloading his crossbow, his movements casual and unhurried, as though he had all the time in the world. The local villagers stood frozen between us, caught between the truth they had witnessed and the violence they had just seen. Their moment of awakening was crumbling, fear reasserting itself, the fragile hope I had kindled beginning to die. "You see," the hunter called out to the crowd, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of a man accustomed to swaying opinions. "This is what the witch wants. This is what she is willing to die for. Monsters, beasts, the very creatures that have plagued your village for generations. She would sacrifice herself to protect them, and you would let her." He shook his head with theatrical disappointment. The Eastern Valleys learned this lesson the hard way. Do not make the same mistake. He raised the reloaded crossbow, aiming this time at the Alpha's head. And I knew, with a certainty that went beyond reason, that if he fired again, nothing would stop the pack from retaliating. The joining might be broken, but the bond remained, and no wolf would watch their king be murdered without responding. The battle that followed would be devastating. Wolves would die. Humans would die. And the covenant that my grandmother had protected for 40 years would shatter beyond any hope of repair. I had to do something. I had to find a way to stop this, to turn the tide, to reach through the fear and hatred and touch the truth that still lived in these people's hearts. But the pain in my shoulder was overwhelming, my vision swimming, my strength draining away with every pulse of blood that escaped my wound. And then I felt her beside me, the silver wolf, pressing her warm body against mine, lending me her strength as I had lent her mine when she lay dying in the snow. Her voice flowed into my mind, not through the full joining, but through the simpler bond we had forged in blood and healing. "You saved me," she said. "Now I save you. Take what you need. We are pack. I felt energy flow into me, not my own, but hers. The vital force of a wolf who was willing to give everything for the guardian who had shown her mercy. It was not enough to heal my wound, not enough to restore what the bolt had taken. But it was enough to rise. It was enough to stand. I pushed myself to my feet, swaying, my blood-soaked hand pressed against my shoulder, and I faced the Eastern hunter with eyes that blazed with all the power the Covenant could still provide. He hesitated, his finger on the crossbow trigger, clearly surprised to see me standing. "You speak of monsters," I said, and though my voice was strained with pain, it carried across the silent field like a bell. "You speak of beasts that plague the village, of threats that must be eliminated. But I wonder, Hunter, have you ever asked yourself what truly threatens these people? Have you ever looked at the web of life that connects all living things and wondered what happens when you tear it apart?" "Pretty words," the hunter sneered, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. "I have heard them before, from other witches, other fools who thought they could protect the wolves with speeches. They all died. Their wolves died with them. And the villages they claimed to love prospered once the burden of their protection was lifted. Did they?" I took a step toward him, then another, drawing on the silver wolf's strength to keep myself upright. Did those villages prosper? Or did the forests sicken and die once the wolves were gone? Did the deer multiply beyond control, stripping the land bare? Did the smaller predators overrun the fields, destroying crops and spreading disease? Did the rivers run muddy and slow without the roots of healthy trees to hold the soil? I paused, letting the questions sink in. I have seen the Eastern Valleys, Hunter. Not with my eyes, but with the memory of the pack. They remember what those forests looked like before your cleansings. They remember the abundance that existed when the balance was maintained. And they remember watching it all die, piece by piece, as the consequences of your hunts rippled outward through the web. The hunter's face had gone pale, his crossbow wavering slightly. Behind him, I could see the local villagers stirring, the truth I had shared with them earlier now reinforced by my words. Martha had stepped forward, her old hands clasped before her, her eyes fixed on me with something that looked like prayer. Thomas had released Garrett and was moving to stand at my side, his presence a silent declaration of loyalty. "You are lying," the hunter said, but doubt had crept into his voice. "You are trying to trick us, to protect your precious wolves with words, because you cannot protect them with strength." "I am not lying," I replied, and I let go of the last reserves of energy I had been hoarding, letting the power of the Covenant flow through me one final time. My medallion blazed with light, bright as the sun, and I felt my grandmother's presence behind me, supporting me, guiding me toward what needed to be done. And I can prove it. I reached out, not with my hands but with my heart, offering the truth to everyone present, even the Eastern hunters, even Garrett, even the man who had shot me. I had not the strength for a full joining. Not now, not wounded and drained as I was. But I had enough for this. I had enough for one final glimpse. The visions flowed outward from me like ripples in a pond. The hunters saw the forests they had cleansed, saw them as the wolves remembered them, lush and green and teeming with life. Then they saw those same forests as they were now, silent and gray, the streams choked with sediment, the meadows overgrazed, the once abundant wildlife reduced to scattered remnants clinging to survival. They saw the villages that had celebrated the wolf hunts, saw how those celebrations had turned to confusion as the crops began to fail, as the game grew scarce, as the very land seemed to turn against those who lived upon it. They saw the truth, inescapable and undeniable, and I watched as that truth broke against the walls of their hatred. Some walls held. The leader of the Eastern hunters screamed and covered his eyes, dropping his crossbow, refusing to see what I was showing him. Garrett fell to his knees, weeping with a pain that went beyond physical, his lifelong hatred crumbling under the weight of understanding he could not accept. But others, many others, let the truth flow through them, and felt it resonate with things they had always suspected but never allowed themselves to believe. When the vision faded, I was on my knees in the snow, the last of my strength spent, the silver wolf pressing against me to keep me from falling further. The field was silent, every human and every wolf frozen in the aftermath of what had been revealed. Then Martha stepped forward, her old voice strong and clear in the morning air. "I have known since I was a girl that the forest was more than it seemed," she said. "I have known that the healers who came before me understood things that have been forgotten, that they worked with powers we have been taught to fear. Today I have seen the truth of what they knew, and I will not forget it." She turned to face the gathered villagers, her weathered face set with determination. "These wolves are not our enemies. They never were. They are our partners in a balance that keeps us all alive. The guardian who lies bleeding in the snow tried to tell us this with words. Now she has shown us with her very life. Will we repay that sacrifice with more violence? Or will we finally learn the lesson we should have learned generations ago?" The silence stretched, heavy and uncertain. I could feel the moment balanced on a knife's edge, the future waiting to be written by the choices made in the next few heartbeats. Thomas stepped to my side, kneeling in the bloody snow, taking my unwounded hand in his. "My grandmother believed in the guardian," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the field. "She believed in the covenant. She died with that belief, comforted by this woman's presence, at peace because she knew the old ways would continue. I did not understand then. I understand now. And I choose to stand with the guardian, whatever the cost." One by one, others stepped forward. The midwives Martha had spoken to, the farmers who had noticed their crops thriving, the healer who had suspected the truth for years. They came to stand around me, forming a circle of protection, their bodies placing themselves between me and any who might still wish me harm. The Eastern hunter leader looked at his fallen crossbow, looked at the villagers standing against him, looked at the pack that still surrounded us with barely contained fury. For a moment, I thought he might attack anyway, might choose death over the admission that everything he had believed was wrong. But something in him broke, some final support that had held his hatred upright for so long. He turned without a word and walked away, his remaining hunters following behind him, leaving the field to those who had chosen a different path. Garrett remained on his knees, still weeping, his hands pressed against his face. Thomas went to him, knelt beside him, spoke words I could not hear but that made the older man shudder with something that might have been relief or might have been despair. Whatever demons had driven Garrett to hate, they would not be exorcised in a single morning. But the hunt was over. The violence had ended. And there would be time now for healing of a different kind. The Alpha approached me as the villagers began to disperse, his massive head lowering until his amber eyes were level with mine. The wound in my shoulder still throbbed with every heartbeat, but the bleeding had slowed, and I could feel my body beginning the long process of recovery. "You risked everything," he said, his mental voice soft with wonder. "You took the bolt meant for me. You gave the last of your strength to show them truth. Why?" I smiled, though it cost me. "Because that is what guardians do," I replied. "We stand between. We protect. We believe that truth is stronger than hatred, even when all evidence suggests otherwise." I paused, feeling the bond between us pulse with something deeper than words. "Because you trusted me with your pack, and I could not betray that trust. Because you are worth saving. All of you are worth saving." The Alpha pressed his forehead against mine, and I felt something pass between us that went beyond the covenant, beyond duty, beyond even the joining we had shared. It was recognition. It was respect. It was the beginning of a partnership that would last for the rest of our lives. The silver wolf nudged her way between us, demanding attention, and I laughed despite the pain. She had given me her strength when I needed it most, had helped me stand when everything in me wanted to fall. I owed her more than I could ever repay. "You are Pack now," she said, her mental voice warm with affection. "Not just guardian. Pack. Family. Ours." Tears streamed down my face, mixing with the blood and sweat and snow. I had spent 6 years alone, hiding, pretending to be nothing. And now, in the space of a few days, I had gained a family larger and fiercer than I had ever imagined possible. Thomas returned to my side as the last of the villagers departed, his expression mixing concern and awe and something else I could not quite name. He helped me to my feet, supporting my weight when my legs threatened to give way, and together we began the slow walk back toward the village. "The Ashfords will not take you back," he said quietly. "Not after what happened here. My mother already suspected something, and now the whole village knows the truth." "I know," I replied. "I would not go back even if they would have me. That life is over. This one is just beginning." He was quiet for a moment, and I could feel him wrestling with something, some decision he was trying to make. "My grandmother left me her cottage," he finally said. "A small place at the edge of the village, near the forest. She always said it should go to someone who understood the old ways." He glanced at me, then away. "I think she meant you. I think she was waiting for you to come." I stopped walking, ignoring the protests of my wounded shoulder, and turned to look at him fully. He was offering me a home. He was offering me a place in a village that had just witnessed me standing among wolves and wielding powers they had been taught to fear. He was risking his own position, his own reputation, everything he had, to give me a chance to belong. "Why?" I asked. "You barely know me. You have only my word and your grandmother's stories to believe. Why would you risk everything for a stranger?" Thomas met my eyes, and I saw in them an honesty that took my breath away. "Because my grandmother saw something in you worth protecting," he said. "Because the wolves see something in you worth following. And because He hesitated, color rising in his cheeks. "Because I see something in you that I have never seen in anyone else. Something true. Something real. Something that makes me want to be better than I am." It was not a declaration of love. We were still strangers in so many ways, still learning the shape of each other's hearts. But it was a beginning. It was a seed planted in fertile ground, waiting for the right conditions to grow. "I will accept your grandmother's cottage," I said, and I let him hear in my voice all the gratitude I could not put into words. "I will build a life here, between the village and the forest, serving the covenant as my grandmother did before me. And I will welcome your friendship, Thomas Ashford, for as long as you choose to offer it." His smile was like sunrise after a long and terrible night. The weeks that followed were difficult in ways I had not anticipated. My wound healed slowly, leaving a scar I would carry for the rest of my life. The village did not embrace me easily, their fear of the old magic too deeply ingrained to vanish with a single revelation. But they tolerated me, and in time, some of them even came to seek me out, bringing injuries and illnesses they hoped I could heal, accepting the medicines I made from herbs the forest provided. I studied my grandmother's book, slowly deciphering the passages written in that shifting script, learning the rituals and ceremonies she had not lived to teach me. The Alpha came to me often in those weeks, sitting with me in the small cottage that became my home, sharing the knowledge of the covenant that only the wolves remembered. We spoke of history and prophecy, of the guardians who had come before, and the challenges we might face in the future. We spoke of the hunters in the eastern valleys, who had retreated but not surrendered, and of the day when they might return. And we spoke of simpler things too, of the seasons turning, of the pack's newest pups, of the silver wolf's leg that had finally healed completely, of my growing place in both worlds, the human and the wild, and of the joy I found in belonging to both. Thomas visited almost daily, helping me repair the cottage, bringing supplies from the village, simply sitting with me when the winter evenings grew long and dark. We talked of his grandmother, of the stories she had told, of the faith she had kept through years when no guardian walked the forest. We talked of his father, slowly coming to terms with the changes in the village, learning to see the wolves as something other than threats. We talked of ourselves, carefully, slowly, building something between us that neither of us yet had a name for. The spring came early that year, as though the forest itself was celebrating the renewal of the covenant. The snow melted, the rivers ran clear and strong, and the first green shoots pushed through the thawing earth. I walked through the woods I now called home, feeling the web of life pulse around me, seeing the connections I had once been blind to, marveling at the beauty of a world in balance. The silver wolf found me in a clearing where wildflowers were beginning to bloom, their white petals bright against the dark soil. She had grown even more beautiful since her injury, her coat gleaming silver in the spring sunlight, her eyes warm with the bond we shared. "The pack is strong," she told me. "Pups are coming. The forest is healthy. You have done well, guardian." "We have done well," I corrected her. I could not have done any of this alone. She made that sound I loved, the one that was almost laughter, and pressed her head against my palm. "Never alone," she agreed. "Pack. Always pack now." I knelt beside her, wrapping my arms around her neck, breathing in her wild scent. In the distance, I could hear the alpha calling, summoning the pack for a hunt. The sound no longer frightened me. It was simply part of the world I had come to love, a reminder of the covenant I served, and the purpose I had finally found. I did not know what the future held. The eastern hunters might return. Other threats might emerge. The balance would always need protecting. The bridge between worlds always need tending. But I was no longer afraid of what might come. I had faced the darkness and found light on the other side. I had lost everything and discovered that everything I truly needed had been waiting for me all along. As I rose and followed the silver wolf toward the alpha's call, I felt my grandmother's medallion warm against my chest, a blessing from across the boundary of death. She had passed the covenant to me, had trusted me with everything she had spent her life protecting. And I would not betray that trust. I would carry it forward, through whatever challenges arose, until the day came to pass it to another. The forest closed around me like an embrace, welcoming me home. Thomas was waiting at the cottage when I returned that evening, a basket of fresh bread in his hands and a question in his eyes that he had been trying to find the courage to ask for weeks. I took the basket from him and set it aside, then turned to face him in the golden light of the setting sun. "Ask me," I said. "Whatever it is, ask me." He took a breath, steadying himself, and I saw in his face a vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to show. "My grandmother believed that the guardian was meant to walk between worlds," he said slowly. "To belong to the forest and the village, to serve as a bridge between them. But she also believed that the guardian was not meant to walk alone. She said that every guardian needed someone to anchor them to humanity, someone to remind them of the world they were protecting." He paused, his eyes searching mine. "I do not know if I am that person. I do not know if I am worthy of standing beside someone with your gifts, but I know that I want to try. I know that every day without you feels empty in a way I cannot explain. And I know that I would spend the rest of my life learning to be what you need, if you would let me." It was not poetry. It was not the grand declarations of the stories I had heard as a child. But it was honest, and it was real, and it was exactly what I needed to hear. I stepped toward him, closing the distance between us, and took his face in my hands. "I have spent 6 years hiding from who I was," I told him. "I have spent 6 years believing that I was meant to be alone, that anyone who came close to me would be destroyed by the things I carried. But you saw me, Thomas. You saw me before I was ready to be seen, and instead of fear, you offered faith. Instead of rejection, you offered shelter. I do not know what the future holds. I do not know what challenges we will face together, But I know that I do not want to face them alone, and I know that when I imagine my life from this day forward, you are in every version of it." He kissed me then, soft and tentative at first, then deeper as the walls between us finally came down. I felt the rightness of it settle into my bones, another thread added to the web of connections that defined my life now. Not just guardian and pack, but human love as well, the anchor he had spoken of, the tie to the world I served. We stood together as the sun sank below the horizon, held in each other's arms, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the forest, the wolves were singing, their voices raised in the ancient songs that celebrated life and love and the turning of the seasons. The medallion hummed against my chest, warm and content, and I felt my grandmother's blessing flow through me like a river finding the sea. I had been a maid, invisible and afraid, hiding from a destiny I did not want to accept. I had been broken by loss and guilt and years of loneliness, but the forest had found me. The wolves had claimed me. And in the end, love had healed the wounds that magic could not touch. The Alpha King had followed his maid to her cabin, and what he discovered had changed everything. Not just for him, not just for me, but for two worlds that had been drifting apart for generations. We had found each other in the darkness, had chosen trust over fear, had built a bridge where only walls had stood before. And now, standing at the threshold of a new life, surrounded by pack and partner and the wild beauty of a world in balance, I finally understood what my grandmother had been trying to tell me all along. The covenant was not a burden. It was a gift. The forest was not a threat. It was a home. And I was not alone. I never had been. I had simply needed to open my eyes and see the family that had been waiting for me all along. The wolves sang on through the night, and I sang with them, my human voice joining their wild chorus in a harmony that had not been heard in a generation. Thomas held my hand and listened, his face full of wonder, his heart beating steady and true beside mine. This was what my grandmother had protected. This was what I would protect now. This was home. And I would defend it with everything I had, for as long as I lived, until the day came to pass the medallion to another and let the cycle begin again. The covenant endured. The balance held. And somewhere in the heart of the forest, beneath the ancient oak where my grandmother slept, I could feel her smiling. Her granddaughter had finally come home.